When we're talking about this transition slowly starting to kind of kick-start in Europe, especially, what can governments do, and what could we achieve here at the COP which might speed this process? What kind of policy kind of structure do we need?
I'm an engineer, so I like simple things. It's like supply and demand. So if there's no demand for it, you won't have the supply. So the binding target will be the demand for governments, for private enterprises and so on, to actually deliver what is required. So the binding target is the most important things to ensure that this transformation from fossil fuel based to renewables are going to take place.
Okay, so there's an interesting catch-22 there, because you often hear people say we can't move to a binding target, we haven't got the technologies to do this, and perhaps the economic cost will be too high, and you're telling us that actually the binding target will trigger the technologies and trigger the innovation. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, look at the United States in the 60s when they said we would like to go to the moon. It was impossible. Yeah, but they said they would, and they ended at the moon, some people said. It's the same here. I mean, it is possible, and yes, it's not going to be easy, and it is going to be expensive, and we will lose jobs, but we will create more jobs in the long run. And I think that's important, and that's one of the key messages in the report as well, that this is a good business case. And I mean, I can't understand why a government won't do this if they create jobs, if they ensure some financial benefits for the country. I mean, it's a kind of win-win-win situation.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's actually one of the things I was going to address, because presumably there's millions of engineers around the world involved in kind of carbon-intensive activities, but their skills could be relatively easily transferred to be working on clean tech, you feel?
Yeah, and it's not only the engineers, it's also the blue-collar workers that have to be trained or reskilled. But in the end, it's better jobs. It's not that unhealthy like the coal mines and so on. So it's actually good for them as well. And the people are there. I know it's a phrase, but it's a golden opportunity. And if people dare to be the first mover, then they will have the advantage of doing so. But if they wait, somebody else will do that, and then they will lose. So those countries, I mean, you could go to the Midwest and US, and they would say, well, we have the coal mines, we have the traditional way of doing things, so we stick to that. And they should do that, and then the rest of the world are creating a lot of jobs, and then they will lose it in the end anyway. So I think they should be kind of upfront, proactive, and then in the report, if we scale it up to some of the numbers to US, it means that they could create 13 million new jobs.
Okay, that's quite an impressive number. Jeff, I think you've picked something else up from Twitter.
Yeah, I'll just remind people you can post your questions or comments about this issue at oneclimate.net, and you can use the Twitter hashtag #OneClimate, and we'll be picking all those up, and we can put as many of them to our guests as possible. There was another tweet on here about Egypt. Apparently here at this conference, Egypt calls for R&D and technology transfer between North and South in the form of research centers for excellence for climate change.
So the issue of technology transfer, quite a controversial one here. What stance are you taking on this?
We need to do that. I mean, instead of sticking to ourselves, that we have to distribute it as much. Of course, there will be money attached to this, and that's up to the politicians to ensure. But I mean, I think it's a really bad situation where we have the technologies, but we're not able, or we're not willing, some people are not willing to share the technologies, even though it could create a better world in the end. But that's a task for the politicians to ensure that the money goes around. And I have heard that both the US and Europe as well are willing to help with some financial contributions.
Okay, we've talked a lot about power production so far, and I know you mentioned the role of fossil fuels in transport, specifically, and the shipping, I know, has been quite a controversial issue here. What kind of potential is there to reduce emissions through the use of technology in these kinds of areas? In transport specifically, I'm thinking about shipping, where maybe access to kind of typical renewable technologies maybe isn't so kind of obvious.
I mean, the whole transportation system, not only on the sea, but also the collective, like the trains and the buses and so on, has a very big potential. And an enormous amount of energy and emission are coming from the transportation center. I mean, if you are in Copenhagen or in London, you see a lot of people that are stuck, I mean, are queuing up, and they are sitting one person in each car. So, I mean, if we are able to coordinate and ensure that the transportation system is effective, it has to be better than what we're used to, then we can reduce the emission a lot. And it's the same with the transportation, I'd say.
So is this about management of the transportation system more than new technologies, or do they both have a role to play?
It's a combination. The management is extremely important, and then the political will to say we want to have a emission-free transportation system, and it will cost money, but it's kind of an investment where you get the return. And if you're not willing to put up the investment in the front, you won't have the return.
Okay. And one other issue that I've found very interesting is smart grids. Talk of these kind of super grids crossing countries and continents in order to transfer energy effectively and efficiently. I noticed this was kind of mentioned in the report. What are the kind of lines of innovation that are possible here?
We need to have a good distribution system of energy. And in Denmark, we have talked about nuclear power plants, and we don't think we don't like it here, but we like the electricity. So we have to ensure that when we have a lot of water in Norway that actually creates a lot of cheap electricity, then it's pretty stupid to have the coal power plants functioning. So we have to distribute that, and it's not that easy. It's actually very complicated, and that's one of the areas where we need a lot of research and development.
Jeff, you're kind of monitoring Twitter as well. Have you got anything else coming up?
Yeah, there's an interesting question here. A point by someone named GGruber66 on Twitter. He says, what about greener planes?
Greener planes? Yeah, I know that a lot of people, I mean, we've become so rich, so it's natural for us to travel around the world. And we like the comfort. But we have to look on engines, on fuels, maybe bigger planes as well, to ensure that the cost per person, bigger planes as well.
This is an interesting thing.
Yeah, because when you look at making automobiles greener, you think about making them smaller, lighter, so they can travel further. And the problem, I assume, with airplanes is that they're so massively heavy, it's hard to use alternative fuels, things like that. So the answer is not lighter planes, it's actually heavier planes.
It's bigger planes, which will reduce the cost in terms of emission and fuel per person. Even though the plane, I mean, if you can take 200 people more having the same fuel, then it's kind of actually good, because I'm not sure that people, as we're getting more wealthier, that we're willing not to travel as much as possible. So we have to integrate that need or that demand from the people. And then bigger planes is one of the solutions, so it becomes greener.
I'll just follow up on that. Where are we in that process? Are we likely to see greener air travel in the next 5 years or so? Is this something that's close, or is it really just a problem that's beyond our reach right now?
It's beyond the horizon. I think, I mean, it takes so many years to develop new planes. I mean, look at Airbus, look at Boeing, and it has to come from some of those. But you kind of back to the supply and demand. That if we want to have, I mean, if the governments are setting a cap on the emission from planes, then I would bet that those planes will be invaded. Yeah, exactly.